Now, as we mentioned there, Facebook and Google could be punished with huge fines by the British government if they fail to rid their platforms of toxic or harmful content. The lawmakers said tech firms listen with their wallets. Meanwhile, YouTube has cut comments on videos featuring kids after it was revealed the comment section were being used to organise a child exploitation network. For tonight's Taking Stock, we're joined by Richard Miles, Pro Vice-Chancellor at Sydney University, and Alex Vikovich, Digital Editor at yourmoney.com.au. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me this evening. Those two kind of stories that we mentioned there, the YouTube one and the one about the UK government, they're separated, but I wonder if there's a kind of a broader theme here, whether or not we're reaching a tipping point where these giants are going to be held a little bit more to account. Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think they're starting to realise that with great power comes great responsibility. And, you know, I think they've missed an opportunity to self-regulate. You know, they became enormously large businesses. They employ thousands and thousands of people, most of whom are top, you know, grads from top universities and so on. They could have invested more in people that could have advised them on these sorts of things. You know, having said that, I think they are in a tough position because, you know, they've consistently said since their inception, these big social media platforms, that they are just they provide a platform for free speech. They're not in the business of crafting that speech or editing that speech or being a publisher themselves. And I think that, you know, has been a difficult thing for them to continually make that argument when, you know, they've been found to be doing the wrong thing and using their, you know, users' data in the wrong way. And, you know, I think they're now paying the price for that.
They do have moderators too. It's not like they're just opening up the floodgates entirely, right? Richard, what do you think about this?
I think it's going to be difficult for them to comply to this. I think it's such a monster. I'd be interested to know how they're going to go about doing this. But as Alex was just saying, they've got all sorts of ingenious people there, you know, making all sorts of different ways of making money. So maybe they can apply themselves to this now.
Of course, listening to your accent there, we know you are from Great Britain. Are you surprised to see that the British Parliament is the one that seems to be standing up here?
Well, I'm surprised we've got time to even think about this with all the Brexit stuff going on.
Yeah,
but, you know,
looking for a distraction, picking a fight with a social giant. So.
Exactly. And I think, you know, yeah, maybe that's the case here. That, you know, politicians are so unpopular in the UK at the moment of every ilk that basically this is probably a bit of a straw man. You know, let's bash the tech companies a bit. Yeah. But, you know, and they're really bashing them there. I mean, the guy from Facebook, you know, and all sorts of this. The press at the moment are really punishing them.
And with good reason. I mean, you know, they've been found... It's not just the policing of the hate speech, because really, I mean, you know, I have some sympathy for them on that front as someone who runs a digital platform. You know, if you're going to do user-generated content and you're going to have a principle that you believe in free speech, then it is difficult to do that. But the use of customer data, you know, has just been kind of profligate. You know, they haven't put a lot of ethical things in place. So I think, you know, a lot of that is, you know, they've brought on themselves. The difficult thing is, you know, when they say they are going to police this stuff, they really need to start making... What does that mean? It means they start to make editorial decisions, right? Because it means that they look at a piece of content and they make a judgment as to whether that is appropriate, not appropriate, outside the realm of social, you know, norm. And so in order to do that, they really are becoming publishers. And, you know, I wonder whether a bunch of engineers, which is who they really hire at the moment, engineers and marketers, can do that. So, you know, I think they do end up becoming publishers whether they like it or not.
I mean, it's the classic media or the message, right? I mean, who do you blame, right?
Yeah.
For the, you know, and it's an age-old discussion.
Yeah. And
I think, I mean, in some respects, again, I agree with Alex around this, that they need to spend more money on getting people to solve these problems rather than to manage these problems. They spend vast sums of money on PR people, right? There's a lot of spin around that, and in the end, we've discovered in the last few years, spin works as a temporary way of getting around things, but it doesn't work forever.
Yeah, I suppose just finally, to look at this in a slightly different way, tax has been a difficult thing to receive out of some of these tech giants. They use offshore tax havens. They are very good at minimising how much they pay. Do you think that it's possible that this is a revenue-raising tactic to say, right, we're going to put you up against something that we don't even think you can do, just so that we can fine you and finally get a little bit of blood out of that stone?
Yeah, look, potentially. Although I would say in their defence, these are relatively young organisations in the scheme of tax evasion. There are large multinational corporates who have not paid any tax for hundreds of years. I have some small sympathy for them in that way. Yes. But, they're clearly spending more money on their auditors and their tax advisors and their lawyers than they are on their moderators.
Certainly true. OK, moving on, because we've got another interesting topic here. The best bottle of Scotch whisky, according to the World Whiskies Award, sounds legit, costs just $18 US. It is the Queen Margot blend from the supermarket chain Lidl. Now, that award comes, of course, after a bottle of $6 Cab Sav from our own Coles supermarkets received a unanimous gold rating during a blind taste test in 2016. So it begs the question, why would you pay top dollar if these cheaper alcohols are getting great prizes? Richard, might start with you.
All right, so what a wine snob would say, which we know I'm not, as we know you guys always mock me for buying wine from Aldi.
A little bit. Well, a little bit, Richard.
It's always, that's what I'm known as, the guy who buys wine from Aldi.
Well, you might be onto something, right?
Yeah, no, well, to some extent, but I mean, one of the things, what a wine snob would say is they'd say that, sure, you can get that upfront kind of flavour, but it's the depth and the texture and, la-di-da.
The subtleties.
Yeah, look, I mean, part of me still really wants to believe, I believe in the market still. I still believe that things are priced accordingly, and I just can't shake the belief that, things that are more expensive are inherently better. Maybe that makes me a wine snob or a whiskey snob.
It's about brand, isn't it? I mean,
look, maybe it is about brand to some extent, but that doesn't mean that it's not aiding the experience, that it's not adding value in some way, that you're not enjoying that product more. So I don't think that necessarily it needs to be that a wine with velvet, more velvety tannins is one that should be more expensive. It's whatever people value, and brand is part of that. But look, I'm a journalist, so I don't pay for my own drinks very often, and so I tend to ask for the more premium stuff precisely because of what we were just talking about. A lot of these companies don't pay their tax. So I try and, do my bit for the public interest by ordering the top shelf stuff. And I do think there's a difference. I do. The Whiskey Awards is one thing, but I'm yet to believe.
But was it the Little World Whiskey Awards?
Well,
who knows?
That's a good question too.
Who's sponsoring these Whiskey Awards? That's what I want to know.
The other thing is, I'm a sucker for those gold stars on those bottles.
Yeah.
I mean, he could say the sort of Mickey Mouse Awards for the worst wine ever, and I'll go, oh, it's a gold.
That's just brand by another sort of technique. Isn't it?
Good to know how to rope you in.
When I first, as you know, I'm an archaeologist, right? And the first, I remember when I first started travelling, I was going a lot into the Middle East, and I was going a lot into North Africa and places. And an old hand said, you always need to have a bottle of Johnny Walker Black Label in your bag to solve all sorts of problems,
Even in North Africa, or maybe especially.
Well, yeah, exactly. and you know what always used to happen? You'd sort of say, oh, would you like to have a glass of whiskey? And they'd say, oh, Johnny Walker, fantastic. And then they'd pour Coke in it.
Weird.
It's just like, really? I should have just gone down to Lidl, right?
Well, but if you pulled out, that's the whole thing. If you pulled out
you wouldn't have get through the border with Lidl.
No, that's exactly right. I used to reveal something about myself. When I was at uni, I worked at a bottle shop for a while, and they said certain buzzwords are going to help you sell this bottle or that bottle or whatever. If it was Australian Shiraz, you've got to say that it's jammy.
Is that right?
Apparently that's the thing to say. I can vouch it actually worked a little bit. Obviously, your Chardonnays, you want that to be oaky. Right? And
you have to say it like that?
Oaky.
Is it the hand gesture?
I wasn't there for very long. I was pretty bad at that job. Okay. Well, I suppose finally, before we move on from that, we need people to be paying top dollar for wine because Australia produces some expensive and lovely wine. So we don't want the word to get out, do we? Because our wine industry might be in trouble.
No, it's not in our interest. Although the latest stats are that due to the trade war, Australian wine is now selling in China for more than French wine is. So, we're doing all right at the moment. But, I think that's right. And I think, it is interesting that people are, there is a bit of a veil of snobbery being lifted. People are shopping more at Aldi and Lidl for these things, which really is interesting. And then if you have a look at some of the top-line Japanese whiskies, for example, some of them are being discontinued. So, maybe this is a broader trend towards the cheaper stuff.
Yeah. Richard, it's a Friday. Are you going to be reaching for the Aldi tonight? Is that the go? Do you practice what you preach here?
I'll buy you your Aldi and you can buy me the Hibiki. How do we do that?
All right, good stuff. We've got one more thing to talk about tonight, which is pretty bizarre. A list of food trends has been released for 2019. It is certainly a little bit different. Apparently, we're going to be going wild for mushroom chips, kale jerky, pumpkin seed butter, pea milk, that is PEA milk. Chickpea pasta is also on the list. Some pretty weird stuff in there, right? How do we feel about this, Alex?
Look, it's not for me, but look, I think it's good. Look, I assume that a lot of this stuff is aimed at the burgeoning vegan market.
Yes.
And you know, I worry about vegans in my life that I know because I have an old school approach to food, and I think that if these fashionable foods are a way of increasing the protein intake for people on these kinds of diets, then that's a great thing. I really think that. I'm not the target market for this, but
I think
diplomatic from you, though. I like that very much.
I think a nice ribeye with some mushroom chips sounds fantastic. Did you say pea milk?
Pea milk.
So we've got almond milk.
Chickpea pasta, I believe they refer to it as.
Okay.
Yeah. But when I first came across these seed butters, I thought what they meant were adding seeds to real butter, which is actually quite appealing, if you ask me. But no, it's not as good as that at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a big industry now, kind of reinventing the wheel when it comes to a lot of foods. Are you game to try any of this stuff, Richard?
I'm game to try. Look, at the uni at the moment, we've just about to set up a project for the students to find ways of marketing insect protein.
Oh, wow.
We're going to be working with a food company, we're going to be working with, hopefully with a restaurant as well, because, in the end, we used to eat lots of insects, so how do we make them?
And I do think that part of it is fascinating. I mean, sometimes you don't know if the companies that are profiting from this stuff, and there are many, we have, entrepreneurs on this show all the time who are doing really interesting things with food. You don't know if they're true believers or if it's a bunch of people in a boardroom taking the piss, just seeing what they can try and make hipsters buy, And I do think
just put it in a jam jar, right?
That's so true.
Right. That's so true. But, there's obviously a more serious side to this, insofar as we're moving to more sustainable, foraged and, goods that aren't being over-farmed. It's a good thing. We're probably eating too many avocados and too many mangoes, and the farmers are under a lot of pressure. So, maybe we should be eating more crickets, but I'll try it after Richard does.
Actually, well, that's a good point, because on Entrepreneurs right here on Your Money on Thursday nights, Jack Delosa had somebody on who was doing this. This is a big thing on eating, I think it was crickets at the time, garlic roasted. I mean, this is the top shelf stuff. And right after the person came offered me some off the plate. Not for me.
You tried it?
I tried it.
Well, just not very interesting?
Just not for me. I had some. I was picking it out of my teeth for hours.
Look, I mean, fat is flavour.
My wife wasn't that chuffed with me when I got home. Look.
But what's fascinating about this hipster culture, it's in terms of food, it's going in that direction of, uber healthy and, sustainably produced and all that. But then there's this kind of counterculture as well, where it's just the most sort of decadent, extra large, fried chicken, waffle cone type stuff as well. So there's not a whole lot in the middle. I feel like we're moving away from the roast and two-veg.
That's true. We do come across those stories a bit. Hey, guys, thank you very much for the chat. Alex Vikovich and Richard Miles. Really appreciate it on a Friday.